The IRGC prepared scenarios exactly for the situation that they're in, where there's an official decapitation of leadership and restraints on command and control, and where the IRGC are left to run the country behind the scenes without an official figurehead.
Today is Monday, March 23rd. This is Boundless Insights, and I'm Aviva Klompas. Today marks a milestone for this show. It is our 150th episode. In an age of sound bites and sensational headlines, we aim to create spaces for thoughtful conversations on issues of the day. We're proud of the show we've built, grateful that you've come along for the ride, and always love when you drop us a note. You can reach me at podcast@boundlessisrael.org. And now, on to today's show. We're entering the fourth week of the war with Iran, and despite the constant stream of news updates, it's difficult to get a clear, honest assessment of how things are going. Official messaging from both Israeli and American leaders points to steady progress: reduced Iranian missile and drone capacity, senior Iranian leaders eliminated, and attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. But the reality feels more complicated. Israelis are still running to shelters multiple times a day. The regime is very much still standing, and Iran is still able to choke global shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. To help cut through the noise and assess how the war is truly progressing, I'm joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. He's a former IDF spokesperson, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and one of the clearest voices on Israeli defense. Let's get into it. Jonathan, it's a big day at Boundless Insights. This is our 150th podcast.
Wow.
And I'm very happy to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. An honor. 150 is a good number. Strong number.
Thank you. Okay, we are now entering the fourth week of the war with Iran. And I have to say, it's feeling very hard to get a real assessment of how it's progressing, because on the one hand, we keep hearing about the reduction in Iranian missiles and drones, but Israelis are still running to shelters every day. There are missiles that are penetrating Israeli aerial defense. People are getting hurt and killed. We keep hearing about regime targets being hit and senior Iranian leaders being assassinated, but the regime is very much still in place and still standing. We keep hearing about Iran's military being severely degraded, but they are still managing to choke traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And then we heard Trump threaten to obliterate Iranian power plants if the strait was not opened within 48 hours. And then today, before that 48 hours could expire, he says he's postponing the strikes for 5 days. So, what is your assessment of how this war is going?
Yeah, I think you make very, very solid points of sound reasoning, because some things don't add up. On one hand, politicians and military people in Israel and the US are telling us one thing, and in some cases, reality feels different. Where I see the lines meet is that I think we're at the stage where, yes, indeed, Israel and the US have inflicted significant long-term damage to Iranian capabilities. They have inflicted significant damage to their production capability, whether it's ballistic missiles and drones, nuclear weapons. I have very little doubt that those two parts of Iranian ability to project force are severely degraded, if not totally temporarily destroyed. But yes, with regards to their ability to fire ballistic missiles and to threaten, to do just enough in order to get insurers and decision makers who are part of the global trade to stop traffic in Hormuz, I agree. They've been able to do that. But from my perspective, from my military perspective, there's no doubt who's winning. There's no doubt who loses more by every day that goes by. The US and Israel are winning, and Iran, the Iranian regime, loses more every day that goes by. But I think we've reached a stage in this conflict where we're in kind of like a twilight zone where we haven't yet decided the battle. There's no decisive victory. There's no decisive outcome. There's no real, turning point or something that has really tipped on the other side. But Israel and the US are chipping away constantly, racking up success, but not yet, obviously, reaching critical mass.
That, I think, is one of the big questions, because it's very hard to understand what exactly would make for success.
I think winning really is surrendering, that your enemy surrenders, begs for a ceasefire and throws up his hands in the air and says, I can't take it anymore, I'm done. That's my definition of winning.
That would be mine also, but I think we have to contend that's not going to happen. The Iranian regime is not going to throw up its hands and say, you won America, you won Israel.
No, I agree. The Iranian regime is, I think, incapable of doing that because of who they are and what they are. I think they will more likely drag Iran, its infrastructure, and its future down into hell with them before they do the rational thing and to raise their arms and take out the white flag and say, okay, we've had it for the sake of the future of our country and our people, we're going to give up. But I mean, if we look at comparisons here, Nazi Germany, they didn't have the sense to surrender. They had to be bombed into total submission.
Yes, but then at some point Hitler committed suicide. Then the leadership fell into disarray. You've wiped out the leadership of Iran, but they're still able to fire the missiles. They're still able to control the strait.
That was years of work, right? With the Second World War, that was years of grinding, of extremely high casualty numbers that eventually, when the Russians reached, or the Soviets reached Berlin, he took his life, and that was it. And in this case, it's different because the Iranian regime, the IRGC, was prepared and prepared scenarios exactly for the situation that they're in, where there's an official decapitation of leadership and restraints on command and control, and where the IRGC are left to run the country behind the scenes without an official figurehead, which was the supreme leader. So in this case, unlike Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and many other totalitarian states, they were prepared for this to happen, and they've prepared their military infrastructure, they've prepared their missiles, and they've prepared their command and control, and also the battle plans. They are prepared for the scenario that we're seeing. And where we are now, if we put ourselves on a continuum of a war, early stages, great and significant success for the US and Israel. We're now in the mid stages where I think what Israel and the US are doing are trying to accumulate critical mass of tactical and operational achievements, and then get to a certain stage where it simply is too much for the IRGC, too much in terms of leaders killed, too much in terms of their infrastructure taken out, their weapons obliterated. And I think Hormuz will be really the tipping point, because when that will be opened up, and I think it's when the US will take over the Hajj Island, that will be the eventual checkmate for the regime, because it will leave them without any real ability to continue to effect or to project force. And that's a few weeks into the future, according to the assessments that I have.
Let's talk about the timeline, because one of the things that I've noticed over the course of this war, and I mean since October 7th, is the patience that everybody has or doesn't have. So Iran has by far the longest patience. They've been waging this war since 1979, and they're very happy to go and wage the war for another 4 decades or 400 years. Israel seems to have a medium-term stomach for this. Israelis are suffering. It's very hard what's happening in the country right now, and yet they want the war to continue. They would like the Iranian threat gone once and for all, and they're willing to endure a fair amount of suffering for that. America does not have that type of patience. They don't have the patience of months, I don't think. And as we all know, the old saying is, it's the economy, stupid. And that's where people outside the Middle East are feeling the impact of this war. Higher gas prices now, and eventually higher costs on everything.
Yeah, I read, I think your portrayal is very accurate, except for one thing. In terms of the economy, when I look at the situation in the US, I don't see significant change. And in terms of, how this will impact US markets and cost of living and gas prices, I think there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of people who in media, international media and international politics, who want that to be the case. But I'm not really sure that it will be the case, because contrary to, for instance, 1973, the US market is so much more insulated from external influences on oil prices because of their ability of domestic production.
America is far less energy dependent on the Middle East than other countries like China and India. That's certainly true. But I will tell you, as an American at the gas pump, we're already paying more.
Okay. I mean,
and Americans are sensitive to this. So you're right. It might not be as bad as it could have been, which is the most Jewish statement ever. But it's still an impact. And even the worry, as we know, is what will cause the markets to go into huge fluctuation.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what the Iranians are counting on. That's their last resort. That's what the only thing that they have left. And then it becomes, like every war, a battle of wills. Who has the strongest will? Who can endure suffering more? And undoubtedly, the Iranian regime and the Iranian people are suffering and will be suffering more than what Westerners will do. And let's not forget that there's a whole plethora of targets in Iran, regime and economic and infrastructure and other targets that Israel and the US haven't struck yet by decision.
Well, there was one, and I'm actually quite interested in asking you about it, because Prime Minister Netanyahu came out and he said Israel acted alone in hitting Iran's major gas field last week. And Trump came out and said that was a bad thing, that shouldn't have been done. But it's actually quite hard for me to imagine that Israel would have done that without the U.S. knowing and giving its consent.
I think that's a classic example of bad cop, good cop. And Israel, many times, either willingly or unwillingly, is casted as the bad cop or as the rogue nation or as the rabid attack dog pulling at the leash. Whatever, how much you despise Israel, you'll pick a different definition of it. But that's many times how Israel is portrayed. And I, just like you, I think it is totally impossible and highly unlikely that Israel would conduct such a significant strategic strike on a sensitive target at this time without not only coordinating it with the US, but also approving it and making sure that it's okay with the US ahead of time. So I think this is much more messaging and part of the diplomacy of it. Sadly, Israel is casted in a position that I don't really like for Israel to be in, but I understand that there has to be leeway, there has to be some flexibility here in the system, and the U.S. takes the more moderate side, and Israel is casted as the more aggressive one. But I have no doubt that this was coordinated, and it simply doesn't make sense for Israel to do something like that on its own.
Now, in the other direction, Iran has intentionally targeted energy infrastructure in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates. So for them, it doesn't seem to be off the table. One of the things that I find very curious about this war is the fact that those countries have not retaliated against Iran. Why haven't we seen them join the fight?
Yeah, by the way, speaking of Iran striking civilian and infrastructure target, they started that long before Israel and the US struck anything related to oil, gas, or energy. Just a lot of people are confused about that. And even in Israeli media, they say, well, the Iranians today, in response to Israeli strike on the Iranian gas field, are now striking oil and gas infrastructure. That's totally wrong. The Iranians from the second and third day were striking oil and gas and natural and national infrastructure in all of the countries that you mentioned. To put it bluntly, what those Arab countries are doing, they're just not serious. The mere fact that both Saudi Arabia and Qatar still have an Iranian military attaché, or still had 13 and 14 days into the war, there still were offices of a military attaché from Iran in their countries as Iran was bombing their infrastructure and causing millions or billions of dollars in damages, and they still had those diplomatic ties. That tells you that there's the level of show, and then there's real level. And the Gulf states, they're just not serious about fighting. They're just not serious about protecting their sovereignty, and they've acquired some of the most advanced and fancy military tech in the world.
Well, that's what's interesting is they have this weaponry. They've been sold the planes. They have it, but they won't use it.
Oh yeah, they have everything. Qatar has a small but on paper capable air force. The Saudis have a large and on paper capable air force, and they have other assets as well. The UAE have been doing a good job at defending themselves in terms of interception rates. But then you ask yourself, the dilemma here should be a very short-lived one. You're being attacked by an enemy. If you want the enemy to stop attacking you, then you need to defend yourself and you need to inflict pain back on that enemy and create an equation where it isn't worth his while to keep on attacking you. The way to do that is not to PNG, persona non grata, the military attaché 13 days after that country starts attacking you.
Or call in the Iranian ambassador for a scolding. That has happened also.
Yeah.
But, so why do you think it is? Do you think that they're afraid of what the response from Iran would be?
Bluntly, I think that they're cowards. I think that they're weak. I think that they are, a lot of fancy tech, but when it comes down to actually fighting, they don't, it's like systemic atrophy. There's no muscle tonus there. There's no real intention to fight. There's parades and there's tech and hardware, but in terms of actually men and, like in Israeli case, women capable of taking to the skies or manning an aircraft system or manning an a ground system and fighting, or a naval system, it doesn't seem as if they have that culture. Even more interesting, before you go to fighting, both UAE and Qatar, they provide tremendously important financial services to Iran. There are trillions, with the T in the beginning, trillions of Iranian dollars, or in other currency, but trillions, the value of trillions of dollars that belong to IRGC and others in both Qatari and Emirati banks. And the real question I'm asking is, what the UAE and Qatar and others could do would be far more damaging to the Iranians if they just told the Iranians, listen, pal, you're stronger than us, probably militarily, so okay, have at it. You just know that we are now going to commandeer all of your assets. We're going to nationalize all Iranian bank accounts in our system, and all of those trillions of dollars that you had that helped you keep your country and regime afloat and evade sanctions, they're gone. Or you have 1 hour to stop doing what you're doing, and then if you don't, we will do so. We haven't heard that either.
I want to ask you another question in the line of wishful thinking, which is what I think that was. And that is, Netanyahu comes out every couple days and he says that there's still major surprises to come. And when I hear surprises, all I can think about is the Hezbollah pager operation. That was the greatest surprise of this war. What is it that you think could be coming? Have these surprises happened and we don't know about it? What's your take on the surprises?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of wartime leaders telegraphing that kind of stuff. I think it belongs more to the realm of terrorists and despots to be, saying those kinds of things. I do think that there are tactical and operational moves by Mossad and the IDF that will become very important. I don't know if there are beeper equivalent operations, Operation Grim Beeper, but in terms of one thing that I think is really important, there's a few issues. One, which wouldn't really be a surprise because everybody knows those are the crown jewels, and this is the enriched uranium that the regime still has.
We need to talk about that because I have some questions about it. But finish this up first.
Yeah, so that's one issue. We'll go back to that, and we may see tactical military surprises related to that. That's one. Two is, I think, where we could see Iranian people, Iranian civilians marching on the streets and taking over facilities, infrastructure, symbols, and headquarters, and doing so with what we call in military language close air support from Israel. And we've seen Israeli drones attack Basij checkpoints, ordinary checkpoints all over Tehran and in many other cities, and basically paving the way, clearing the way in various areas. And I wouldn't be surprised if we would see that level of coordination facilitated by agents and people on the ground that will allow protesters to actually gain momentum. Because that is something that the protesters have been prevented from doing by the regime using machine gun fire and snipers and just mowing down protesters and then stopping protests cold. But if they're allowed to generate momentum and to take a location and then a second and a third one, that could be very important. So I wouldn't be all too surprised to see something in that realm, armed opposition, and opposition that has aerial support, which I think will be very important from an emotional and symbolic point of view. Imagine you're chanting, you've got that crowd energy, you're walking down the street, lots of young, strong, brave people. You get that sense, that thrill of energy flowing, and then you meet oppressors who either first with less lethal means and then with actually lethal means, and then something out of the sky blows them away. That could be a very, very powerful thing. And I think that's something that the regime fears, the Basij fears, and probably Israel is planning. And I wouldn't be surprised if we would see on the outskirts of Iran, not specifically in Tehran, but in the periphery of the cities, uprisings that will look much more military in their behavior, equipped with weapons, much more organized, much more focused, and have the ability to actually take over the seats of power in certain cities. That'll be difficult to do in Tehran. It probably won't happen first in Tehran, but there are other cities in the periphery where I think this is something that's kind of a surprise that to me seems very likely.
Well, let's talk about this enriched uranium. So Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium is about 970 pounds or 430 kilograms, enriched to 60% purity. People talk about this idea of an audacious Israeli or American mission to just retrieve it from underground in one of the facilities that America bombed back in June. Operationally, how difficult is that? Can you lay it out for us?
Yeah, that's a challenging operation. It would mean dropping special forces very deep into enemy territory, creating a perimeter by fire. So you would drop special forces, maybe with light vehicles, maybe with some heavy machine guns and that type of weaponry, but you probably wouldn't be able to drop any tanks and anything other heavy, but maybe that could happen as well. You drop special forces, it would be their mission to actually go in, retrieve or destroy the material, depending on where it is, how difficult it is to access, and what kind of efforts are needed in order to extract. And that's a whole thing in of its own, hazardous materials and radioactive, and that's a whole story of technical detail that I don't know enough about, but I know that it's being war cased and the scenarios are being prepared. But you have to drop forces, create a perimeter, defend that perimeter so that Iranian defense forces won't be able to approach the area and attack it. And you'll have to do that for a good few hours until the troops are able to get there, penetrate, go in, hands on, and then either destroy or extract, depending on, again, I think mostly collateral damage and what the environmental risk will be or what the risk will be for the troops, and then extract your forces out, hopefully everybody intact and safe, and get them out of country.
Because no question, Iran is also watching the sites and would be prepared, so
Yep.
It wouldn't be without a fight.
It would be with the fight, it would be with the severe fighting, and any special forces contingent going in there should anticipate that it will be booby-trapped, rigged, and prepared in advance, and it will be a very difficult task to complete. Would most likely include casualties, either fighting to get there or while on target. It's a difficult task, but it's not impossible. It's not something that's, it's not a raid to Entebbe. It's easier than that. And Israeli troops, I'm sure you're aware, but I'll repeat for the listeners and viewers, Israeli commandos did a similar kind of operation in Syria about a year and a half ago, where the Shaldag unit, the Israeli Air Force Special Forces, actually were sent to a location about 200 kilometers away from Israel's border, so in the mountainous areas of central western Syria, and actually got to a location breached in and disabled all of the infrastructure which was hidden. This was a military research center of advanced weaponry. All of the infrastructure that was hidden many stories below ground in the mountain. They got there, completed the task, and then got out without any soldiers getting wounded. So yes, different scenario. That was a surprise attack. This one should be anticipated. But in terms of firepower and capabilities, the US and Israel operating together would mean significant firepower at the disposal of any ground unit operating there. But
they have the capabilities.
Oh yeah, they do.
We're running short on time, but I can't end without asking you about the situation in Lebanon. It doesn't make the news nearly as much, but it's a serious situation. There's a lot of Israeli troops operating in southern Lebanon. Can you give us an update on the fight against Hezbollah?
Well, if we go back a few 2.5 weeks, Hezbollah committed the mistake that Israel wanted it to do in joining the battle, joining the war against Israel at the side of Iran, very much in defiance of the request and demand of the democratically elected government of Lebanon, who said very clearly, Hezbollah, you do not have the mandate. We do not want you to drag us into this war at the behest of Iran. This is not Lebanon's fight, and our trajectory is totally different. Hezbollah completely ignored that and dragged Lebanon into a war, which I think will be extremely costly for Hezbollah. It has the potential in a few months' time to actually bring Hezbollah to the weakest position and the most fragile position they've ever been in, and maybe even their military undoing if Israel and the Lebanese government, with US and French support, are able to actually execute the plan. What's currently happening is that there's ground fighting close to the Israeli border. Israeli troops have penetrated inside. We're talking about 2.5 division combat teams. That's about 20,000-ish soldiers operating on the Lebanese side of the border, not far away from the border, but basically clearing the immediate area along the border to prevent Hezbollah from using any infrastructure close to the border in order to attack Israeli villages. Massive rocket fire from Lebanon at Israeli communities. And there's relentless bombardment of Kiryat Shmona and many other northern cities and towns. And Israel is striking targets in Dahya, the southern part of Beirut, in southern Lebanon, and also in northeastern Lebanon. But the real objective here is to weaken Hezbollah to such an extent that the Lebanese authorities will actually be able to take control of their country and turn Hezbollah from this all-powerful Iranian militia that basically runs the country against the will of the Lebanese state into perhaps a political party that represents Shiites in southern Lebanon.
And you think the Lebanese government is willing to do that?
I think they're willing. My question is capable, the will as in the stomach to do the heavy lifting, to get their hands dirty, to get confrontational with Hezbollah. There's question marks there. And as usual, Israel does the heavy lifting in the region.
That is the theme across the board for everybody in the Middle East. Yeah. Israel has to step in.
Israel has to step in. If it's about saving Druze or Kurds or the Lebanese state or the Iranian people, if it's heavy lifting, then there's one country that definitely punches way above its weight class, and that's Israel. But you're right to say that the situation in Lebanon is very important. From an Israeli perspective, this, contextually, this has been the biggest threat on the Israeli home front for the last 25, 30 years. And now for Israel to be able to engage that and degrade more and more and more the military capabilities of Hezbollah, hopefully coupled with a significant weakening or undoing of the Iranian regime. If Israel has the stamina and fortitude and American support, things can go really well. And I think we can look at a totally different future between Israel and Lebanon. Things can also go badly, and we can go back to where we were before, in terms of Hezbollah still existing and still holding the Lebanese state hostage to Iranian dictates. But if you're going to ask me to assess, I think the assessment is more likely that things will go towards the better and that we'll see a significant improvement. That will come after Hezbollah is hit and made to hurt more and more, and after the Lebanese state will find the courage to actually do what they should have done 20, 30 years ago.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And thank you for being here for our 150th.
Thank you. Happy anniversary.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Boundless Insights. Whether you've been with us from the start or are just discovering our show, we're so glad you're here. If today's conversation sparked a question, challenged your thinking, or made you shake your head, I want to hear from you. Email me at podcast@boundlessisrael.org. Your feedback gives us ideas for new topics and new guests. And if you believe these conversations matter, there are 3 ways to support the show. First, hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. Second, help us spread the word. Share an episode with friends and family, post about it, or mention it in a group chat. It really does make a difference. And third, consider supporting our work. Boundless is a nonprofit, and we rely on donors to keep the show going. You can make a gift at boundlessisrael.org/donate. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep the conversation going.